I see a lot of people these days sort of spend a lot of energy worrying about what's coming afterwards or like what their place in the world is going to be when they're done. It feels less like a place where people just kind of are messing around and finding themselves, or that they just like have total freedom to do that. Um, I don't know. It's just this like sense of anxiety about what comes next is the best way that I think I can put it right now.
I did a podcast once where there was a water bottle in front of my face the whole time.
Oh no.
It ruined the whole podcast.
Do you just have to throw it away? What do you do with that?
With that one in particular, I ended up just uploading it that way, and then I had to at some point just make a big list of like checklists that I just run through every time.
Learned your lesson.
Yeah, the amount of times I've had a mistake, this camera goes off here, or their phone had a problem there, but luckily with time, gotten better, but things still happen.
Yeah, nice. You're very focused on like the visuals of the podcast. That's different from your average podcast.
That's true. Yeah, I think podcasts for a long time are very audio focused, but at least I think in recent years I've seen like video become a lot more popular with it. And I personally like I feel like when I'm watching the visual of a podcast, I just feel like there's a lot more I see there. For some reason, like I feel like I connect with them more because I can like see their face as they're talking. And
Yeah,
I know sometimes it can get boring, but
No, for sure.
yeah. I remember this was a podcast I watched where they were out like in the jungle filming it, and they had in the Amazon jungle they had a table set up, 2 mics, and they were just out there in suits in the jungle. And I think sometimes, I mean, with time, if I can find like cool spots or random places to do it,
That's awesome.
it always adds an element to it.
Yeah, a lot of ways you could go with this.
Yeah, definitely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Greg Bodwin, who is my EECS 203 professor at UMich, discrete math. He is a assistant professor of computer science, if I'm not wrong, at the University of Michigan. And from what I understand, you primarily study graph theory, combinators, and just computer science, theoretical computer science.
Yep, that's right.
Cool. So how about you give everyone just a quick overview, like broad perspective about like what your research entails and what you mainly do?
Yeah, for sure. So, hey, I'm Greg. Thanks for having me on. So the research that I do is somewhere between math and computer science. Whenever I like talk to someone, get in an Uber or something, and they ask me what I do, I tell them math because that just lands them much closer to the truth than computer science. But officially, I'm here in the computer science department. It's so the area that I mostly work in is called graph theory. This is basically the math of how stuff relates to each other. So anytime you have a system where things can potentially be connected, like, a social network where maybe 2 people are following each other, that's a type of connection you might be interested in. Or like the internet, that's something that has pieces of it that are either connected to each other or not connected. That's kind of works the same way. The question is just what's going on with those systems. What can we say about them mathematically? I kind of got into all of this specifically through the human angle on it, through the like, how do you understand social networks? How do you understand like an economic network, or like if you have just a bunch of people interacting with each other in these complicated ways, what can we say about that with math tools?
Yeah, it's really cool. I think it's cool how there's always like so many factors that influence everything, and I think that gets really complicated when you're looking at it from such like a theoretical point of view, where it's like how do we know like this factor is now impacting everything in the background? So I'm curious, like how much of your work is like strictly theoretical, like just looking at the math behind it, and how much do you go deep into some of the potential applications of it, such as you mentioned that what motivates you a lot might be like, for example, social networks and how like people are connected in some way, and like how mathematical models can help us to understand them. So how deep do you go in your research into like specific applications of it, and how much of it is just like strictly theoretical?
Yeah, it almost always starts with it starts grounded in some sort of application, is what I would say, and then quickly moves away from that. It kind of works in the other direction. Did a project recently that was about like chess rating systems. So all chess players get assigned some number that's supposed to indicate how good they are. You make that number go up when they win, you make that number go down when they lose. So like what rule should you be using to make it go up or down? So this is something that started with just humans and how you communicate something like chess skill to humans using these ideas of math and computer science. But then once it starts there, like the very first thing that you do is you start abstracting away as many details as you possibly can. Like these actual rating systems, they use all these complicated formulas. They pay attention to how many times two players have played matches against each other in the past. And we sort of started by simplifying all of that away just to say, like, if we're going to do math about it, we kind of need to make it the simplest thing that we possibly can.
Amazing. Yeah, I've seen a lot of different kinds of rating systems, especially in sports. I think sports ratings and rankings is something so popular and everyone's always talking about. But I'm always curious, like, how do those rankings work in a way? Like,
Hmm.
you mentioned that sometimes they're severely complicated and they're like analyzing hundreds of different variables, and sometimes it's maybe better to just simplify it as much as possible to make it more coherent so people can actually understand what's happening. So
Yeah.
when you think about like some of the more popular rating systems, you gave chess as one example, but any kind of rating system that's popular, whether it's like national sports, etc. Do you think their algorithms are like severely complex and confusing, or do you think they typically try to follow like some kind of simple strategy? Or
Yeah, there's really a huge range of it. Some of them are have a million variables going on and are just impossible for anyone but the person who made them to understand what they're really saying. There are some that are simple. The thing that really gets me though about it is that only some of them are like the property that I think is most exciting about these things is called being strategy proof. And what this means is like a basic property of a rating system is if I want to get a high rating, this system should tell me that I want to win as many games as I possibly can, for example. And this kind of shockingly is not true about all rating systems. There's a story that I like. So there was a Pokemon Go cash tournament recently, and they used one of these rating systems in order to try to figure out like who the best people were who would get invited to this sponsored cash tournament and they were going to make a bunch of money. And some people basically figured out that they could lose a few games on purpose, and something about the way that this rating system worked would sort of allow them to then later win a few games and catapult their rating past what it would have otherwise been. So these people who weren't actually good at the system got invited to cash prize tournaments by manipulating it.
do we know how that happened? Like, what was wrong with the rating system?
Yeah, so after this happened, there was sort of this scramble to be like, wait a minute, like we've been designing terrible rating systems. And this wasn't some obscure rating system either. It's something called Glico 2, which is among the most popular ones that are used out there. And so since then, in the last few years, there's been some math work on how do you make a rating system that does all the things you want
How
it to
recent
do.
was this?
What's that?
How recent was this?
I think it was 2021, I want to
Okay,
say. I
it's
can
pretty
look that up
recent.
and let you
Yeah,
know. But
amazing. And you mentioned it was called Glico.
Glico,
Glico.
Glicko.
So is that like a general rating system that's used in many different domains, or that's specific to
Yeah.
Pokemon
No,
Go?
this is a
Okay.
general rating system that's used all over the place.
Can you talk more about that? Like, what is that? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. It's essentially an update rule. So like if Glicko will look at the last few games that you've played against somebody, or last few games that you've played against anyone, and it will take the ratings of those players into account in some way, and then try to make its best guess about your rating as a function of like, did you win or lose against the ratings of all these other players? So this is the base thing. They have some formula that they use to do this updating. The key thing about Glicko 2, this one that got attacked, is that it had sort of an extra little detail where it was trying to guess how sure it was of your rating. Would say like if you have been winning against good players and losing against bad players and you just do that back and forth, it sort of has some parameter that it sets really high to be like, I have no idea what
Oh
this
wow.
person is doing. I'm just confused about them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the crux of where things went wrong. People figured out that they could just sort of confuse the system by winning or losing games on purpose, and that would cause it to adjust them really high in certain situations.
When you're, I'm not sure how much you work directly with designing these kind of algorithms, but
Mhm.
when you look at these kind of algorithms, do you think it's typically better to make it more complex so that we're accounting for more variables so it could potentially get a more accurate representation than something more basic, or do you think it's usually better to opt for simplicity?
Honestly, I fall really strongly on the side of it's better to opt for simplicity, I think. Um, this is especially true lately. Like you were saying something earlier, which was insightful, that when people see these rating systems, they just like take a number and don't think about it that hard. They just say, okay, this team has this rating and this other team has this rating. Guess they're pretty good. And this is true. This is how people think about data these days. They just kind of see the headline and move on. And for that reason, like your thing has to be explainable for it to have any value to anybody.
Have you ever heard of the book The Goal?
No, tell me about it.
Because the more you're talking about this, the more it reminds me of like something I remember from that book.
Yeah.
The Goal is a fiction book, but it's an educational fiction book where it walks through the story of this plant manager who has a failing plant, and he's basically the story of how he saved it from about to die and close down to making it extremely profitable. So it's a business book, but I remember one thing he noticed in his plant that was going wrong was that they had so many complicated data tracking systems everywhere in the plant.
Hmm.
And they thought that that was a good thing because their certain machines were being extremely efficient, and they used that as a metric of success. And for some reason, it seemed that they were so successful, yet their plant was failing and running out of business. And it seemed that each individual team was only trying to maximize the efficiency based on that metric that we're told that that's the metric you need, but the overall metric was going down at the same time. So it's basically a book that explained to me that simplicity is always better, that everyone should know the goal of the whole company, not just the goal of that specific.
Yeah.
And it seems kind of similar here because sometimes you can get so obsessed with like such a small variable trying to maximize that, but it's like causing the whole system to fail. And I think we showed that when everyone was kind of aligned with the same goal, the goal is to make money, and how is what we're doing here actually helping the company as a whole. That's what allowed the plant to start to find success. But it's always like set in my mind that simplicity is always better. Like even when we live our day-to-day lives, that trying to complicate it too much often causes it to start to crash in some way, like even life or some kind of business or mathematical formulas and algorithms. And it seems that theme of simplicity always seems to come back. But
Yeah, for sure. I super agree with you. I feel like it's even harder to do these days. Like I think back to when I was in college, and I don't know, it just that felt simpler to me than what it's like to be in school right now. It just feels like there's more moving parts. You got to worry about what's happening in the world around you. I don't know. How's that been for you? Do you feel like you were able to live this, to like kind of focus on whatever goal you need?
it's a good question. I think there are definitely moments where it could become too much, but I think I've gotten better at responding to that because, I mean, I think I typically like to be driven in a way. Like I like to put a lot on my plate and like achieve things because it's a part of life I enjoy, and I think it's just this constant cycle of like, okay, now I have too much, so I gotta start coming down, and I don't have enough, so I have to keep going up, and just finding that balance. But
Yeah,
I
I feel
think
that.
people just get after a while that you kind of get used to it, and you kind of learn how to ride the waves and not drown in them. But I'm curious, like, how does school now feel different than when you were in school? Like, what do you see as different?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've like asked myself that a lot of times, and it's it's a feeling more than it is something that I can like easily put into words. But I guess I see a lot of people these days sort of spend a lot of energy worrying about what's coming afterwards, or like what their place in the world is going to be when they're done. It feels less like a place where less like a place where people just kind of are messing around and finding themselves, or that they just like have total freedom to do that. um, I don't know, it's just this like sense of anxiety about what comes next is the best way that I think I can put it right now. I don't know, what do you think? Is that resonate at all?
I've definitely seen that a lot, and I guess when you live in the bubble, like that's normal to you. But it's interesting. Like, was that totally not existent before? This constant fear of like what's coming next. Like, am I doing enough? Like, will I be successful? Was that there before a lot?
The piece of it, you called it a fear, and
Yeah.
that's the piece of it that wasn't there. Like people talked about this and like what the world was going to be like, but no one like, I don't want to say no one worried about it, but it just wasn't. It was exciting.
That feeling does it comes to me once in a while, and
Yeah.
then you gotta find a way to deal with it. And I definitely see it in a lot of other people that, um, I guess there's this pressure that there's always a constant pressure that you're not doing enough. I
Hmm.
think that feeling comes back that you have to be like in a bunch of clubs. You have to be signing up for internships already. Like you're a month in the college and you're already looking for next summer.
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, part of me like, again, the driven part of me like kind of enjoys it in some way, but then obviously sometimes it gets too much where you start to look at the life paths available to you and try to constrain yourself, and you're not really, I think you stop learning and you stop finding beauty in things around you when everything becomes an ends to a mean.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something I see, that I think for most of high school, education was an ends to a mean in my eyes. I didn't find, I wouldn't say like I didn't find much joy in it, but it was definitely an obligation more than something I look forward to.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of changed this year though for me. And I feel like I genuinely enjoy learning now, like through school, and I think
Cool.
EECS 203 is a part of that. If I'm being
Awesome.
honest, I'm not just saying that for the podcast. Like it's probably my favorite class I've taken at university so far. Just I think there's a lot of things I like about it, but I feel like when I'm going there, like I'm excited to like figure out how things work. And I
Thanks.
think that's a
Appreciate that.
curiosity I see inside of me, and it kind of fulfills that curiosity in a way because I'm starting to see like how things come together, and it's exciting to learn about that place. But in general, I think a lot of people don't see school in that way, and it's very obligatory. That I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, thanks for the comments about H203. It's nice to hear. I've spent a lot of like late nights like fine tuning homework problems and things for the last
It's a great
few months.
course. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love it too. That's why I do it. Yeah. So people finding it obligatory, I definitely feel that sometimes. Like, there's a professor somewhere who, but the story is that they will offer any student in their class a C minus in the class. Like on the first day, they can just like, you can click a button, you get a C minus in the class, and they will give you one-on-one tutoring for an hour every week in exchange. And nobody ever takes this in their class. C minus is sort of like here, it's below the threshold that you would need to continue in the major. And they do this, the point that they're making being that like most students in the class are prioritizing the grade that they get, like the letter that gets written down, as opposed to like this opportunity of one-on-one tutoring among this enormous class.
It's big.
Yeah, and it's a very cynical point, so I don't know if I love it for that reason, but it's true, and I guess when I say that, it almost sounds like I'm criticizing the students who are not taking this option, and I don't mean it that way. Like, I can completely understand why someone would prioritizing having a stable job in a future and all of that over like whatever math problem I think is cool this week. But it's not a criticism, but it's a lament. I just wish that these two things could not be fighting each other for space, and that people could feel like they had a stable future and then move on to the next thing, which is finding these things cool.
Yeah, I don't think it's a criticism. I think it's more just a reflection of our culture shift over
Yeah.
time. And I think fear does. I've actually talked to my friend about this over the summer. It's just reminded me we're driving back from a hike and we were just talking in the car, and he told me like he asked me, "Are you worried about whether you're gonna have a job in the future?" And I think that's a growing concern more like this year than any year.
Yeah.
Because there's all this hype around generative AI as this new booming thing.
Oh yeah.
Job market scarcity, something everyone's talking about. I personally don't think it's something we have to worry about in our generation, but I think the fear of that, and I don't think news and media help with that a lot because they love to
That's for sure
exaggerate
true.
exaggerate topics way past the point. But yeah, I
The
think
fear is specifically that generative AI will take whatever job you would otherwise get.
I've heard a lot of that. I've heard a lot of. I think the world is changing so rapidly now that we don't know what's coming next.
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on job market scarcity? Do you think that's a real concern?
Is it a real concern? I mean, yeah, in the sense that the economy goes up and it comes down, and like a lot of tech companies are hiring less this year than they did 5 years ago. And the question of is it a real concern? It matters enormously. Like, when you graduate, like there's just, things come and go, and it's going to get good again and it's going to get bad again after that. Specifically about the question of generative AI, honestly, no, I am not as concerned as a lot of other people are, specifically about that taking jobs. The thing that I find comforting in all of this is history, in the sense that if you look at like what people wrote when computers were first invented, or what people wrote when the printing press was first invented or whatever else, it has a lot of the same flavor. They're like, this is going to change everything, and whatever jobs people have are going to stop existing. And that was actually all completely true. Like, these inventions did destroy a certain type of job. A computer literally used to be a job that people would hold where they would get equations and have to work them out. But it didn't hurt the economy in the same way. It just changed what was going to happen next. So I 100% agree with you that we have no idea what's coming in the future, and anyone who's making predictions about this stuff is probably wrong. But
Yeah.
I don't think that doesn't make me pessimistic.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. I'm curious about the history of AI,
Mhm.
just because I think I've spoken to a lot of people that think AI was just created in the last 3 years, and I guess a lot of people don't really understand like what even is AI. Or I
Uh-huh.
mean, I know you know like the background understanding of how it works with the graph theory. I'm sure that is a huge application in neural networks. I'm
Yeah.
not sure how much you directly work with neural networks in AI stuff, but is that a big theme of your research as well?
Yeah, I don't directly work with neural nets or do any AI stuff in my
Okay.
research at all, but you are right. Neural nets are a type of graph, and
Yeah.
there's some very specific process. It's an algorithm that's getting run over the graph. So there's some connection there, and a rising tide lifts all boats. So it's been good
Say
for
that
graph.
again. The rising.
A rising tide lifts all boats is the expression. Just what I mean by that is that since things are good for AI, like anything that's kind of tangentially related to AI, it's kind of a good time to be in that as
That's
well.
definitely true. Yeah.
Yeah. History of AI. It, yeah, it's definitely not 3 years old. It goes back longer than that.
Yeah.
There's a story that I think is funny that was around the beginning of AI. I forget when this was. I want to say in the 70s sometime. Um, a researcher had a workshop, and what that means in academia is just they'll invite a bunch of experts in the area to all meet up in some city or at a hotel or a cabin or something, and just kind of work on problems for a few days. And this workshop had a schedule to it, like many.
What kind of problems are these?
So that this will vary by workshop. This specific one was kind of focused on AI though, and it was one of the first ones, which is why it's remembered. So they had some schedule where they were like, okay, in the morning we're going to talk about this type of problem, and in the evening maybe we'll like try to solve this other problem and see what progress we can make. But by the end of this workshop, the like last item was they were like, okay, by this point in the workshop, we will have figured out how to make an artificial general intelligence that can like speak like a human. So they originally budgeted themselves, 3 4 days of dedicated work in order to achieve this milestone that it's what 50 years later, something like that. And
What did they define as AI at the time?
um, yeah, what did they define as AI at the time? That's a good question. I don't totally have a perfect definition for you, but I
Hmm.
think anything that was making predictions was kind of their minimum threshold for what an AI could be. Something where you feed it data and then it can use that data to start making a prediction of one type or another.
Got it. Cool. So it dates back to '70s, right? So
At least that, probably
got it.
longer.
Probably longer. Yeah. I mean, if you just think about anything that can, I guess, predicting itself, that's probably around a good time frame for it to start.
Hmm.
So yeah, where to go from there? So they were dealing with this problem. They're in this workshop. They're trying to create something that can make predictions for itself, or as you described, like something that can like speak like a human,
Hmm.
which might have been too far-reaching of a goal at the time.
Yeah.
But where to go next from there, if you know
Where did
the storyline
the
of yeah.
storyline of AI? Yeah.
And if you don't know, it's all right. But
I don't know the details of the timeline. This is a little bit outside my area,
yeah,
so
that's all right.
sorry if I missed something. I know that there's a phase that people talk about they call AI winter, which
Okay.
um, I don't even know how long it was, but just sort of a long period of time where people tried stuff and weren't really making any serious progress over whatever was known before.
Mm.
And the the chapter, so I'm compressing a lot of years into this AI winter, and I don't know how long it was
It's okay. No
exactly.
worries at all. Yeah.
The Yeah, but these recurrent neural networks that I also don't remember when those started, but they just won. They won a Nobel Prize recently, I think in physics. These were sort of the thing that lifted us into the current era.
Amazing. If you, I know you're not like an AI researcher per se, but if you just look at AI's current capabilities and look at uh, the future, what do you think are some of the capabilities AI will be able to pick up? Like, what do you, if you just like close your eyes and envision a future, like what are future capabilities you think AI will have that we just don't maybe can even think about yet?
Yeah. Future capabilities of AI. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm totally speculating here, but I guess I think it's going to be. I think it's going to get better at problem solving, essentially. So, like in my playing with the current systems, they're fantastic for stuff like, editing language or writing something or anything like this. If you give them math problems, they're okay.
Not
They can solve like some basic stuff. I've been putting a bunch of the 203 homeworks through this for obvious reasons, and they're good on the easier questions, and they just sort of start wildly hallucinating on some of the harder questions, and I think that's going to be less and less true every year.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a huge benefit to us all. If
Yeah, for sure.
Design something that has that capability. I'm curious, like, what patterns you've seen when you're like studying, when you're using AI for the EX203 class in terms of its capabilities, because I've noticed that when it doesn't know how to do it, it will pretend it does know. And
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we reach a state where I can at least admit that this is past my, like, I genuinely don't know how to do this. And instead of, I think there's definitely the creativity. It's like the creativity and the problem solving are kind of mixed into one, and it's like making up solutions and magical things. But
yeah, this is true. I mean, students do that too. If they don't know how to solve a problem, they very often pretend that they can.
Yeah.
So I like to think it's the same. No, it's yeah, so saying I don't know would be fantastic. I would love it if they could pull that off
Yeah.
a little bit more.
Amazing. So what other ways have you used it, either in the education sphere, your research, or just in life in general, in terms of like applying AI to maybe coursework, education?
Yeah, let's see. Used it in a bunch of dumb little ways. I used all the image generating stuff to like make a game for some friends at some point. It was just like, tried to like, I did this with my family actually. I tried to like generate images that corresponded to all of our little like family stories or phrases or whatever, and then they had to like guess which one was which.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of just like fun to be had with it in that way. Everyone is very focused on what it's going to mean for jobs and tech, and its effect on artists, and these are all very real questions. Like, I don't want to diminish them at all, but there's a lot of just like, nobody quite has had all of the ideas that you could have about these things. If you it's like if you were around in the first 10 years of painting, you'd get to be the person who invented a lot of painting techniques. And that's kind of what it feels like to me right now.
Well, I'm glad you shared the view that you don't think it's going to be like take over all our jobs and we're all going to have nothing possible to do, because I think there is something in our human nature that's always looking for the bad. It's probably just the evolutionary part of our brain, because it's true that if you do go and read back to any time there's some new technology being developed, all the articles and all the books are talking about this will ruin the world, the end of the world's coming soon, and I feel like there have been so many books about that topic in particular, and
Yeah, for
we
sure.
always find a way to adapt. So I think it's a cool part of humanity that at least so far we've always found a way to make
Yeah.
do.
Is this where do you think about these things?
Somewhat, but I don't say like I ever spent too much time worrying about it. That I always come back to the realization that I think life's kind of a journey, and I'm excited for the problems that will be along the way and kind of deal with it one step at a time. Like I say that it's foolish to think that far ahead, but I mean I think any human will naturally start to worry. I think you can't really control that, but I think I always try to come back to the realization that I think it's just about, I'm kind of excited for the mystery of what's next. And
Yeah.
I think I am pretty hopeful. I think I really admire humanity and admire everything humanity's created. So I do think that I try to look at the pros behind it, because there's not enough narratives, I think, of people highlighting all the incredible things AI is doing. And I don't know if you've heard about technologies like Neuralink, for example, that have done so much incredible work that are impacting so many people's lives. So I try to look at the positives and say that most of humanity is good. And I think with the good intention that we'll just continue to solve every problem along the way.
Yeah,
But,
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
What about you?
Yeah, it's tough to keep that perspective sometimes.
Sometimes.
I feel that. Like, gotta look away from the news every now and then, and just in order to like have that be the background.
Do you find yourself worried at times, like usually, or?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, how can you not with everything going on? Yeah, honestly, as time goes on, I find myself worrying for like the current crop of students more than I find myself worrying about my own state. I'll probably have this job or, a closely related version of it for most of my life and be fine. But yeah, I see people working very hard out there and not getting security in exchange for that. And that's the thing that gets me more than anything else. Like seeing people kind of do everything right, study hard, get A's, stay out of trouble, and then I want that to be a ticket to them having the life that they want to have in the end.
Are there any specific examples you reflect on where that what you see in our generation like stood out to you?
Any specific examples
Maybe
of somebody
interactions with
maybe
people.
not having this, you mean? Or
Yeah,
having
any like
this?
specific examples, whether conversations with people. You don't have to mention specific details, but does any like moment recently where you really saw this firsthand?
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. There's some undergrads who I've worked with on research projects who have sort of expressed a version of this. They've sort of been like, they really like research. They kind of wish that they could be doing math and that could be their thing, but they worry about the stability associated with it, and so instead they'll go find a job in industry, which, it's not that easy. It's not like they just went and decided to have a job in industry and then got one. This was a like years long process for some of them, and yeah, these are like consistently brilliant people who have a thing, like have this type of art, I guess, if you want to call it that they're potentially into. But the thing that dominates their decision making and their thoughts more than that is stability in the future. I like fantasize about how much brain space we could free up for people like this if they just didn't have to like wake up in the morning and have that be one of the things that they think about.
So they sacrifice the art that they really find beautiful, the skills that they really want to explore and develop and fulfill in order to do a very like standardized, specific either coursework or courses designed or geared toward to get a very specific job which they don't even know they're gonna get.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's a. I definitely see that a lot because I, I think it's natural when you remove most of the stimulation and the obligation that each human finds something beautiful, whatever
Yeah.
that is, and the way their brain is designed or their intelligence style or whatever they're attracted to from childhood, like they start to lean more into that, and then it
Hmm.
somehow manifests into what they go on to pursue. And obviously, that's very like idealistic. It's never been so perfect, but I think that the more I've done these podcasts, the more I can see those patterns in people.
Yeah.
Definitely, and it's I try to stay optimistic about it. That even though the world is designed in such a way where it might limit you more, there's still ways to access that curiosity.
Hmm.
Um, and enjoying what you do. I think that's a big thing as well.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I love stuff like this too that just like lets people say whatever like random weird thing that they're into.
yeah,
We need more of that.
yeah. I mean, these are a lot of fun. I mean, it's love to learn about like what's going through people's minds as well.
Yeah.
Some of these things don't get spoken about at all.
Yeah. What do you think is yours? Do you have like a, you know, latent thing that you wish you could spend all of your time on if it like what would you do if money weren't an issue if your future is just stable?
It's a great question. Yeah,
You don't have to have an
that's
answer, but
that's a question I do ask myself sometimes. So it's something I've thought about. I think a quote I like a lot is, "If you close your eyes, you had $100 billion in the bank account right now. Like, what would your life look like?"
yeah.
And honestly, like for me, it comes back to simplicity. That I mean, there's definitely values to look at. That those are the most important things in my life. That regardless of even what I'm doing, like those are the fundamental. Like I want a big family. That's something I really want. I want good health, longevity, health span,
Hmm.
span that like eating clean, just like living a healthy like life of just I think I definitely have found things I love,
Yeah.
and I'm glad I've been able to find that. I think a lot of people it takes a lot of time to find those things, but I'm grateful that in the last couple of years like I've found like at least a couple like themes or pillars that I would love to just throw myself into as much as possible. Like
Nice.
I think one of them is just like the typical like health, like longevity, diet, gym. That sphere is definitely one big one. But the second sphere is just, I think this project has been a lot of fun, and I'm into creating things. I'm into building things from the ground up and like seeing how they manifest. And I think this created like a whole network of people who've all come together, share their ideas, and then go back in history. And I think this whole project has been a lot of fun. But at the same time, I do like problem solving as well. That's something I feel like just a life of doing some kind of business like this plus a life of pursuing health. Like I think there's something still like my brain wants more related to problem solving, and that's where I find myself lean more into, at least now, it helps me lean more into like coursework and like clubs and stuff that are designed toward problem solving. Yeah. Something that I can use my brain for in a way.
For sure.
It's like it's hard to explain that, but maybe you can relate to that. I think because X2 is all problem solving.
It's 100% problem solving.
Yeah, so it does help guide me toward more CS related stuff, and I don't want to just like do CS or just do problem solving, but I want to see it contribute to something big. I think that's why a club like M Racing was attractive to me, because like building race cars is cool, and the life of like.
What's the club?
It's called M Racing. So
M Racing. Oh yeah, okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah, so I'm just like thinking about all these things, and
awesome.
I don't know. I mean, there's all these like different pillars, and I think to me the complete life is like a little bit of mix of all of those.
Have you actually built a race car through this thing?
I just started, so
okay,
they
cool.
do.
But
yes.
The plan will be to do
they
that.
They do, yeah. So there's a competition called Formula SAE, which is like a student competition where there's like a bunch of teams around the country, and usually within university affiliated, and they'll develop a race car from the ground up every year, and then they'll compete in a real Formula competition once a year. And I think Michigan placed really high last year, so
cool.
They have a pretty strong team.
Do you drive it as well?
We don't drive. There's a driver, but okay. I'm pretty sure the driver's from the school as well.
Okay.
So
it's like a high level of trust to get in a car built.
It's pretty crazy, but those guys like are really smart. I feel like I'm really behind, but yeah.
That's awesome. Great. Yeah, it sounds cool. It sounds like the piece of that resonates with me is you're like, you gotta like contribute to something big, be a part of some like huge idea, or build something, or like really contribute to the world, but then like also be around people who are gonna like not care that much or something like that. I don't totally mean.
What do you mean by not care?
I mean like, you want them to be happy for you, but like you want a group of people who just like wants you to come home and just exist around them, and isn't gonna like, this isn't like your friends and family aren't around you because you build race cars. They're around you for a different reason, like making sure that you have that as well.
See what you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but sitting in your lecture, it seems that you're very passionate about what you do.
Yeah.
So,
love it.
What does your idea look like? If I gave you $100 billion right now,
yeah,
is this what you still be doing?
Yeah, I would still be doing a version of this for sure. Like, I wouldn't stop doing math or teaching math, and maybe I use that to hire a few more graders or something like that and save myself some time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's roughly that. And as I was saying earlier, I'm living on a farm currently, and one of the nice things about that is that there's like, I have a community, like we have dinner together once a week, and mow lawns and stuff like that. And like these people don't care at all about discrete math or math at all. Like they know that I do it, and like that's the extent of what they want to know, and that's great. Like that's like, it's a nice thing to come home to, just to be like, I can go wave my arms around and say stuff about discrete math that I'm excited about to a group of people, but then like have this perspective of these people, they care more about dogs and going for walks in the woods and playing with there's a bunch of kids on the farm currently, and that's just it's nice to have that as well. It's easy to get swept up in the one thing that you spend all your time doing if you're not grounded that way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that's why I think family in general, community is such a big value of mine. I think people should have that, because you talk about this anxiety people have of not being enough or not doing enough, or the fear of not having a job, and a lot of that comes back to as well that they feel like they have eyes on them, that they have to do something or be something, or else they'll fade into irrelevance.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, having those people around you kind of remind you that you do what you love, you work hard to achieve the goals that you set out for yourself, yet you come home and they don't care, not in a negative way, but in a positive way, that they love you for just who you are.
Yeah.
Really. And it kind of helps you gain that perspective maybe.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Amazing. I'm curious about how far back the story of graphs go for you in your life?
Uh-huh.
So where's day one of graphs?
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. What's day one for graphs? Um, okay. So I can tell you the first like moment or like conversation I remember that really pushed me in this direction. So before this conversation that I'm about to get to, thought I wanted to do psychology when I first came into college. I was like, I like people. I want to like do some kind of analytical science thing about how they think and who they are. And then like very quickly realized that what I was describing is not psychology. Like it doesn't wind up feeling like math or science, and at least not the classes that I took. Maybe I picked the wrong ones. And I kind of switched to economics and law from there. I thought that was maybe going to be the more like how to talk about how people interact with each other and what they owe to each other and all this. The thing that got me was in college. A friend of mine, she had just broken up with her boyfriend, and the reason that she broke up with him is that she caught him going through her phone and like reading her texts without having said that he could do that. And so, clearly a violation. They broke up, and we were having this big conversation about like encryption, basically. Like, do you have the question on the table was like, do you have the rights to encryption? Like, do you believe that it's a basic human right for me to be able to send you a message and like employ whatever technology there is to employ to make sure that no one else could read it or understand it? So I, knowing that question, like came down on the side of yes. I was like, obviously this is a basic human right. People should be able to like have that type of privacy and say things to each other that other people don't necessarily hear without their permission. And this was a few days after the breakup, by the way. We didn't just like immediately launch into like philosophy afterwards. But my friend kind of made this counterpoint that it's not actually mathematically known that encryption exists, which is to say there's an open question. It's called the P versus NP problem. It's not exactly important what it is, but it's like a mathematical or computer science question. And if the answer turns out to be one thing rather than the other, then that would mean that all of the systems that we currently use to encrypt messages and send messages back and forth are fundamentally broken. There's something that someone with the right algorithms could sort of look in on the encrypted text that we're sending each other and actually just figure out what the message was in the first place. So the question became like, do you have the right to a thing that doesn't necessarily even mathematically exist? Like, what would that even mean to say that like the world owes me encryption, but it's a math problem about whether or not I can have it? And somehow this just like got into this. What this really did is it drove me into theoretical computer science. Like it was this like fundamental philosophical question about how what we owe to each other is tied up in what's even mathematically possible. There's all these mathematical formulations of privacy now, which I think are super interesting. And from all of these questions, I sort of slowly drifted into graph theory as just like the most basic model that I feel like, going back, I guess our theme is simplicity today. It was to me the simplest model that can actually say something non-trivial about people and how they interact and how you look at one of these systems and understand how it works.
Amazing. Yeah, it's a really interesting story. A question I have for you is about the P versus NP problem. So
Okay.
so the question you proposed was, is there even a way to encrypt something
Mm-hmm.
in a way where it's physically impossible for anyone but the person to understand it? Is that what the fundamental question was, or?
It's so if we really get into the math of it, it's not like exactly the P versus NP problem. It's
Okay.
like there are some. It's closely related, is what I'll say without getting into too many details. But the short story is that like the the methods of encryption that we use are such that if I send you a message, even if it's just like a text or something like that, or maybe it's my credit card number because I'm buying something from you or anything like that, there's like some very specific algorithm that you and I can run together that makes it so that like even if a third party is standing in the room with us and listening to everything that we say to each other, we can still just set things up in exactly the right way so that we can understand each other, but the third party can't. It's this is the cryptography, basically, like the processes that are used to do this. And the basis, like when we say the third party can't understand us, what we really mean by that is that the third party would have to solve an incredibly long, hard math problem in order to understand us. And so there's some fundamental assumption that these long, hard math problems that are being used in cryptography really are hard to solve. If the third party like somehow had the ability to quickly, efficiently solve these math problems, that would be enough to let them crack our code.
So there's one piece that the third party has to do some extremely long mathematical formula to understand our conversation. Yet for us, it's almost like a split second and we can understand it. There's not like much work we have to really do to understand each other.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. If to be a little bit more precise about it, you could think of it like what we have to do is like multiplying together two numbers and figuring out what we get, and that's relatively easy to do. There's efficient ways to multiply numbers and figure out what their product is, even when those numbers are enormous. But what the adversary would have to do is more like they get an enormous number and they have to factor it into the two numbers that created it. And there's not a fast way to do that in the same way that there's a fast way to multiply.
So what are currently people saying about this problem? Is there more, are we leaning toward more that there might actually be a way to encrypt in such an efficient manner?
So experts almost universally believe that encryption is real. Like these problems such as factoring or whatever else that's sort of like that gets used, that these truly are hard to solve, and so therefore these encryptions are safe. One of the kind of interesting things going on is so specifically the factoring based encryption schemes get broken by quantum computers. So we're safe, but only for the reason that quantum computers don't really exist yet. This is mostly a theoretical, model, and Google and some other companies are pumping tons of money into building these, but they're getting bigger and bigger, but there's still fundamental questions to be solved before these are going to be anything that gets any sort of widespread use.
Could you explain what the fundamental idea behind quantum computing is? Like, what is the main foundation behind what it's, in theory, like what its capabilities could be?
Yeah. All right. So there's sort of two different answers to that question. In terms of like the real low level stuff, instead of bits, zeros and ones used by normal computers, they use qubits, which are something else. But the point is that they're roughly something that can sort of vary continuously between 0 and 1 with a few extra details. I'm oversimplifying things here.
Yeah.
So it's just like a different type of computer, and that's where the power is coming from. But B, the thing that they're really good at is like sorting through a bunch of options really fast. So for example, if I were to give you like a long list of numbers and ask you, is the number 5 somewhere in this list? You just kind of have to go one by one and check them all by hand to see if 5 is in the list. But quantum computers doing some sort of like hard to understand quantum magic, they don't have to search the entire list. They can only do about like square root the number of elements in the list in order to figure out.
When you say in some magical way, I'm sure that's how it seemed like the layperson, but are there humans who can understand how it's doing it?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay. So there's some interesting. Is there hope for quantum computing, do you think?
Is there yeah. The fact that it breaks encryption is the reason why there's hope, and like governments love stuff that breaks encryption.
Yes.
So
yeah.
This is it's called Shor's algorithm, named after Peter Shor, is the person who made it. This is the one that is able to factor numbers quantumly.
Wow.
And Peter Shor, having invented this, I think bought quantum computing like 50 years or something worth of research, like showing this application, like really helped get people excited about it. And by now there's all sorts of cool stuff that people know how to do with it, at least in theory.
That's really cool. Amazing. So with encryption, I know there's probably multiple applications of it. Like the most common one is if I'm going on a website, I put in my credit card information there, and it's able to successfully allow the transaction to go through without someone getting access to my information. How so we say that there are potentially ways to break encryption. How difficult is it to break something like that for a hacker? Is that very easy to do?
To break the credit card number
Yeah,
thing?
through that encryption.
No, it's virtually impossible for them to
Virtually
do. These
impossible.
systems are very safe.
Okay.
Yeah, or another way to say this is that anyone who is able to hack this system would first need to make an enormous mathematical breakthrough in order to do it. They would need to solve some unsolved math problem that would completely change the world if they did.
Amazing. That's cool. And who else uses how much does the government use encryption as a form of communication? I'm assuming it's really
Oh, a lot, yeah.
yeah.
Like any sort of, military application, things get very heavily encrypted.
Is there anything like any particular story you remember or have read about application of encryption with government related stuff?
Yeah. The classic one is you seen The Imitation Game? It's a
No,
movie.
I haven't. What's it called? M Station?
The Imitation Game.
Imitation Game.
Yeah,
No, I haven't.
it's the name of the movie. It was it's like a Benedict Cumberbatch movie.
Okay.
This is about World War II. He was playing this guy Alan Turing. Alan Turing is relevant to the conversation. He's the guy who invented both computer science theory and AI. He's considered the father of both of these areas. He's British, and he worked for the government in World War II and was able to crack the German encryption scheme.
Wow.
This thing called the Enigma machine that they
All on his
used.
own?
I mean, he had a team
His team?
helping
Okay.
him, but he sort of had an early computer that he personally built, whose purpose, well, with the team, but its purpose was to crack this specific German code. And in doing so, this is credited with potentially winning the war. They knew what all the troop movements were going to be. Turned out to be incredibly useful. Sort of a sad story after that. Alan Turing was gay, and this was not accepted in the 1950s. He was chemically castrated by the British government and then committed suicide shortly after that.
Wow.
Yeah, they've issued a formal apology relatively recently in the grand scheme of things, but it's a sad story. He invented AI, he invented theoretical computer science. He basically, can be credited as one of the people who won World War II for the Allies, and then that's how he was treated.
Humans are harsh.
What's that?
Humans are harsh.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Amazing. So yeah, what are you most excited about with graph theory stuff besides encryption? So we've touched on many different topics related to things that excite you, but I don't know, when you're walking to class one day or you're walking to do research, like what are you excited about?
Yeah, I'm into shortest paths right now. That's some of what's going on that whiteboard behind you.
Yeah, I was looking at it when you were in the bathroom.
Yep. Yeah, so shortest paths. There's a joke that everyone does research on the thing that they're bad at in real life, and I have a horrible sense of direction.
Oh, really?
So this is mine. It's shortest paths. But what I like about them is that people basically all understand what a shortest path is. You're at point A, you want to get to point B. There's a lot of different ways you could walk from A to B, but some of them are faster than others, and in your daily life you want to find the right one, whichever one is fastest, or maybe you want Google Maps to tell you which one is fastest and it has to do the computation for you. But what's cool about them is that we know nothing about them. The algorithms that get used to actually find shortest paths, or even just basic questions like what can shortest paths look like, how can they intersect each other, what can they do, we just don't know the answer to these things. We only have these really not sophisticated methods in order to do it. So this is exciting to me. I like this sort of easy to understand what the question is, but really not clear where to go with it. And B, because there's not that much known about it in the grand scheme of things, you kind of get to just make stuff up. You get to start making up words that you think describe important mathematical concepts. In 203 we drop these definitions sometimes, or this definition about a graph is important or describes something useful for it. But yeah, getting to be the person who makes up those words is kind of a fun role.
Amazing. Yeah. So how do a lot of those algorithms work? If I go on Google Maps and I say I want to go to Bob and Betty Beister building from Mojo, how is it calculating?
Yeah. So there's a few algorithms that are commonly used. The most common one, you can sort of think of it like a wave. It will take, if you're in Mujo, it'll sort of just start creating, sort of saying, okay, in 0 minutes, you can only be where you currently are. In 1 minute, here's all the places you could get to. And then you could sort of extend that and say in 2 minutes, here's all the places you can get to. Keeps kind of like growing that bubble until it hits the bubble, like first includes the Bob and Betty Beister building. And then that's when it'll stop and it'll say, okay, we now know that it's a 3 minute long path, and then you can sort of backtrace to figure out what the path would be.
That's really cool. I never thought about it that way, but I think every time I open Google Maps, I'm gonna see that bubble effect in my head.
Yeah, if you ever take 376, you'll learn more about this algorithm than you ever want to know.
Interesting. Yeah. I think there's something unique about our brains that, genetically our brains kind of operate in different ways, that the thoughts that we have are so different person to person, but B, when we get specialized in something, it amplifies even more. So I wonder, like, even when you're just at your farm or just living life, like, is your brain like always looking for efficiency or shortest paths? Like, I wonder, like, do you see that as a pattern in yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. You're super right. First of all, I really feel like people specialize, and then everything becomes an instance of whatever they're into. Yeah. It's not that I see everything around me as an instance of shortest paths, but this is like what I've been drifting off to lately. If I go for a walk around the farm, I'll just sort of, haven't been looking at the trees. I've been sort of zoning out and thinking about, like, kind of imagining these shortest paths pictures and trying to figure out how they work.
So as you're solving, oh, sorry, I cut you off.
That was insightful that people like kind of hyper focus on one thing and it starts to color everything around them. Do you have anything like that?
It's interesting,
especially right now.
I guess sometimes I'm talking to someone and I feel like I'm podcasting them. Yeah, so that's definitely. I think I've tried to pick up skills that I've noticed in podcasters. Like I try to obsess over like all the different ways you can master the art of a conversation.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think there's an art behind anything, whether that's graphs or podcasts or pretty much anything, and there's always ways that you can get better at that art, I would say.
What's the answer? What have you learned about how to like make a conversation good?
I think there's definitely a lot of different things at play. I think some of the ones that I found to be the most useful is like how present you are and how much you're listening. 'Cause sometimes I noticed that the podcast never have to be about me exuding my knowledge, but it's really about like how good am I at listening, connecting ideas, and asking the right question at the right time. I think that's it's hard to explain how to do that skill well, but I think with practice you get better and better. And I still think when I watch some other podcasters, they seem like it's like second nature to them. And I'm hoping that one by one I can keep slowly inching toward that.
Yeah,
that's definitely there. But then the biggest one is just like being genuinely curious. And I think the word genuine is really important because you can't really fake curiosity. And I've definitely had podcasts where I've tried to fake it, and then it's like the podcast goes bad because I guess I don't care enough. But I can tell like when I care enough, like I'll end up going for an hour, 2 hours, and I'm just asking questions, and the time kind of flies in a way.
Yeah.
And I think having a genuine curiosity, people like being around the energy too, I would say. And then just like trying to think about the other person more than yourself. I think we can get very self-centered in a way. And I just try as hard as I can to kind of think about the other person, and I think it works so far. But yeah, always trying to improve that skill.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it sounds like you're saying like you notice yourself podcasting people in your day-to-day life. That sounds like a good thing. Like if you're right, people love being around like someone who's gonna be genuinely curious about whatever they're currently into.
Yeah, I've noticed that even when I'm talking to someone and they care about me, I feel really good, and then I wonder like, okay, they'd probably feel good if I care about them. And it's not just a bag of tricks to make people like you, but it's like it also feels good when you actually can find it naturally within you, or it just kind of becomes second nature. Because like I think it's cool to learn about people. I think it's really cool how if you just go about your day, like everyone's currently thinking about something else and currently somewhere else in their journey of existence, and it's really fun to pick people's brains and just like see like what are they thinking about all day, like what's going through their mind. And every podcast is like it's like kind of incredible. Like this is a whole gateway into your life, and it's like it's really cool. It's really fun to kind of explore that too. So yeah,
that's awesome.
Amazing. What were we talking about before this? Graph theory.
Graphs.
I wonder
shortest paths.
Shortest paths. So we have this fundamental problem of trying to figure out how to optimize or become more efficient with calculating shortest path. That's the main problem. What does your work like typically consist of as research? Like for example, Sitting in Eeks 203, it's easy for me to define what work looks like. Work looks like solving the homework assignment for the week. But
Right.
what does research look like and differ from other kinds of either professions or just type problem solving type of things? But
Yeah. So there's sort of two modes worth of research. One of them is I go to a coffee shop and I order a bunch of coffee and maybe some food, and then I just sort of like sit there for maybe like 4 or 5 hours a day. I kind of just run out of stamina at that point. I just can't add numbers anymore at that point. Yeah, I just have a few places where I'm regulars. I'm a few places where I'm irregular, and you just sort of like it's mostly pen and paper work. I have a bunch of notebooks lying around, and I'll just sort of bring one of those and scribble in it for a bit and try to just understand something new, or like find something that I don't understand that I could start thinking about, or like notice that I have two conflicting beliefs about a thing and then try to resolve those. So it's a lot of that. It's a lot of kind of staring off into space and then drawing. Like my notebooks are all full of these like lines that kind of intersect each other at certain dots in different ways. That's one thing that it looks like. The other thing that it looks like is I do research with students here. 3 of them are specifically PhD students that I hired. I asked the government for money. They give me money. I use it to hire students. And so that's, anything that's on this whiteboard, this is where we have those meetings. Those are a lot of fun too. Those are social as opposed to the other one, which is me sitting by myself. But we'll sort of just both be standing in this space right here, wandering around, and we write stuff on the board and kind of debate something. I don't know if debate is the right word for what's going on,
bounce
but like,
ideas.
yeah.
Cool.
I like that a lot. That's honestly my favorite part of it, which
Amazing.
I didn't expect to be true.
Yeah. Do you ever feel resistance when you kind of know it's an unsolved problem? Like, do you ever question, like, is this even solvable?
Oh, yeah.
I know that this is something that you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if there's a clear problem you're trying to solve, but it's more optimizing it further, if I'm not wrong, shortest path. So do you ever feel a mental block or resistance, whether it lasts for an hour or a couple of days, just like maybe existentialism in a way, just because it's never been solved before, so there's a resistance to even approaching it?
Oh, yeah. I'd say like, I don't know, 2/3, maybe more of the problems that I like sit down and try to solve, I just completely fail. It just goes nowhere. And that used to really bother me. Like this would just like, on a bad day, it would cause these spirals of like, I don't actually know how to do math. Am I doing the right thing? I just like, the worst is when you like spend a week thinking that you're getting somewhere and then realize that like on the second day you had like added 2 and 2 and got 5, and so everything that you've done since then is garbage. Which is it's all the time. It's so common, and at some point or another I made peace with it. I'm just like, well, I guess that week was nothing. It's part of the process. If you do it long enough, the times you get lucky start to balance out the times that you get unlucky. But yeah, especially when you first start, it can suck.
What does it feel like when the dots connect and things start to make sense?
It's great. I like immediately get excited about telling people about it. Honestly, like the thing about these like 4 to 5 hour marathons is that they're really hard to talk about. Like if someone's like, "How was your day?" You can't really tell. Like it's just kind of like I don't know. I like swam around and maybe it was good, maybe it was bad. I have no idea. It's just like, and then but like the thing that I like about the dots connecting, it's not like, okay, cool, now this math problem is solved. It's like, okay, cool, now I like have the ability to put this in a concrete form that I could like bring to someone else. I could then like come to you and be like, hey, check out this thing I made. It like goes from being a lump of clay to like an actual pot, is the way I would put it.
That's a great analogy. I think that goes for any kind of profession, that creative expression, occupation at least.
Yeah, for
Like,
sure.
I think that same analogy, like turning clay to a pot. Sometimes I'll look at the podcast. Like sometimes I like going in without knowing anything about a person, and that's like a piece of clay, and then you mold it as you keep having a conversation, and you make it into something like a sculpture or something, and
Yeah.
I kind of relate to that feeling a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
Do you?
And like you get to show people then. Like you have
Yeah,
this, I'm sure, I don't know how much editing work goes into these podcasts.
decent amount. I mean, I'd say for about an hour and a half podcast, I'll spend about 2 hours editing it, and then about another 15-20 minutes time stamping it,
Nice.
and then another 10 minutes just doing wallpaper stuff, and then I have someone else who makes shorter content for me. So
Cool.
yeah,
Yeah, that the like getting to show someone the thing that you made at the end and like get them to understand why you like it. I feel like that's the draw for me.
tell me more about that. So you derive a lot of the joy in maybe the pride you feel when you can show someone your art. Can you describe that a little bit more?
Yeah, there's some pride in it for sure. Like, you know, definitely feels good when someone's like, "Oh wow, that's such a clever solution. I never would have thought of that." I have some of that. I'm sure everyone does. Yeah, but even more than that, it feels more like when you're in this intermediate phase where you've like kind of made progress, but you haven't fully solved the problem. It's just I'm completely unable to communicate where I am to the people around me. It's like I would have to give them this detailed description of the problem and like be like, okay, I tried this thing, but it didn't work, but now I think I can make it work. And you know, you get 30 seconds into that and people's eyes kind of glaze over, which is fair. Like, you know, you're trying to tell them about this super technical thing. But once it's done, it becomes this sort of thing that you can draw pictures of and you know write down in some nice concise form. I've been really into that actually in my research lately. I wrote some paper about a year ago that instead of kind of being theorems and proofs along the lines of 203, it had some of that, but I also like made these little, I like set it all up as this like you have some hikers in the forest and they want to find paths that do something or another, and spent a bunch of time drawing these like dumb little stick figure pictures of them like going in different ways. And it was just like it was like playing around with a different way to communicate what it had been like to think about it in the first place. Somehow like I feel bad about this in 203 actually more than anything. This structure of like showing someone a theorem and a proof like loses so much of what's going on. What's going on is like the cool bit is that you like had to draw all these pictures and like imagine all these things, and like somehow the objects are talking back to you. You make up a graph and then like something has to be true about it and you don't get to pick what's true about it. But then like what it feels like to think through that is not black and white text that says theorem and then proof. It's something else. And
So standardizes it too much.
yeah, it standardizes it too much and like
Breaks the beauty a little bit.
yeah, it breaks immersion is the phrase that's coming to mind.
Say that again.
Breaks immersion.
Breaks immersion. It's really interesting. Is there any ideas you have of a better way to do it, or is that something you think about?
This is what I'm kind of like I'm into experimenting with that right now, and so yeah, I have a million ideas, and I'm sure most of them are terrible, but I'll try them out and see how they look. But like I don't know if you can like make a video of this concept, like have some kind of graph or object that's like evolving or changing over the course of this video. And I'm sure you could make that, but like the question is that gonna communicate something new? Is that gonna like show people what it's like to think about this as opposed to just like showing them a snapshot of the endpoint? That I've sort of I always dislike the linearity of these things, like 203 proofs is just line, but really like you know maybe you think of these lines as expressing one concept and these lines as expressing another concept. I would love to have something that's sort of like visually arranged on a page with blobs that you could expand and unexpand. I don't know. These are all real half-baked ideas that I'll try at some point, and I'm sure if I'm lucky, one of them will stick.
I'm excited to see how it manifests. Sounds
Yeah.
really exciting.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah, you're also equally passionate about X203 in particular, in addition to your research from our conversation today. So, what are some, when you talk about those late nights you spend designing this course, like what in particular are you like thinking about? Like what are you trying to make better about this course whenever you do that?
Oh yeah, so a bunch of things have changed this particular semester. it's like very easy. 203 like lives right on this borderline of like cool concept to tedious busy work, I think, and it's like so easy to fall on the wrong side of that. So a lot of what I've been doing is like taking homework problems, trying to like think about what is the actual like interesting piece of this, and then like try to remove as many other details as I possibly can to make it like as easy as possible while still having the like core of it that I care about, which I don't know, not saying I'm trying to make them as easy as possible. It's not trying to describe them as easy. I don't think that they're easy at all, but like,
Well, simple but not easy.
yeah, yeah, there you go. But it's a lot of that. It's like the experience is crazy. It's if I can try a metaphor, it's like if you like took all of your friends and then you like locked them in your basement and then you showed them a TV show that you like and tried to get them to like it.
Uh,
It's like that. It's like it, the students all feel like this kind of captive audience at times, but also like I'm trying to make them forget that and make them just see the thing that I like.
that's interesting. Is that how you feel during lecture?
Like they're a
Yeah.
captive audience. I feel less that way during lecture for the reason, like I don't feel that about the people in the room because the people in the room all chose to be there and we
Yes.
didn't force them to be there.
That's right. I want to talk about that in particular. That was
Uh,
really interesting. Tell me more, yeah.
yeah, I think I would feel that if it was like an attendance required class, that would really be on the front of my mind.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
I feel that about like this, when I imagine people watching the lecture recording later, I like, the part of me that worries is like, are they just like hating this? And like every time I get excited about something, they're like, this sucks. I can't believe that I have to do this. That's the like goblin brain.
yeah. Interesting. That's very interesting. I would say that when I was reflecting on like why I like this course, there are definitely many pieces of it I liked, but I think one of the things I liked about it a lot is that it's very much on you. If you A want to do well in this course, and B how much you want to put into this course.
Yeah.
Like all my other classes, you're required to be there. You're forced to be attendance. You're tracking your attendance. They're forcing you to be there. And I guess a lot of classes that maybe like prerequisite classes or classes that people have to take for like their LSA requirements, like they don't want to be there. So a lot of the teachers know that if they don't require it, like no one would show up. And
Hmm.
I think one thing I liked about this class is that like I feel like I'm deciding to do it, and I always like it when I feel like I have that power in my hand over the fact that someone's like chaining me up and like forcing me into a room.
Nice.
Like I feel in my other lectures, like oh I don't want to be here, but I feel like it's always like my choice when I walk in, and it's like no one's like sitting there policing me, and I
Yeah.
feel like that's given me a lot more freedom to like, actually like sit there and like enjoy what I'm doing. Because like I feel like I'm choosing to be there and I'm choosing to like learn and do this, and I could choose not to be here, but then a that might not benefit me in terms of either a learning the material or b like even just me finding the material interesting to begin with, right? And I like that piece of a lot of it, but I also liked a lot of the other elements of the course that are basically designed to reduce as much policing as possible. And I think having the entire week to do the assignment,
Hmm.
I like that a lot too because I mean as we've talked about for the entirety of today that problems are not there's a more of a joy in like seeing how it like comes together with time rather than just following a linear process of like okay Tuesday homework do next 2 days from now just do the problems like do the right work. But I think you even said that I remember in the first week that like look at the problems as soon as you get the problems and then at least like think about it for the week. And I think I find that like pretty useful because I try to at least start it early if I can, and sometimes
Nice. Yeah.
you do end up pushing it back, but I try to at least get going with it early just so that sometimes like something will hit me when I'm walking. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I might
Nice.
just like randomly be thinking about it. And I think
I love
that
to
way
hear
I
that.
feel like for the first time after a while, like I'm not just like being forced to sit there and learn something. Like I'd say your course is the exact opposite. Like I just feel like it's the most free because like I choose how much I want to put in, and that way I feel like I get the most out of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Trey. I appreciate
Yeah,
that. That's really great to hear. I love the like when you're like walking and just something hits you. Like, love that you said
it
that. That's
happens a
like
lot
it's
now.
the best feeling. I love that.
I wonder
I
how
just
much
feel
does
like
that
I'm
happen to
like
you.
constantly chasing that high. I
How,
mean, it happens if I'm lucky once a week. I don't know about some problem that I'm thinking about, but like that's the fix. That's the thing that I'm like chasing when I do this.
yeah, amazing. I'm glad to hear. Yeah. Um, There's something about walks. I think I've seen like I personally love walks a lot just because I get the best ideas on walks for
Hmm.
some reason, and I've even read that like even a lot of like the masters of history all got their best ideas on walks. I
Yeah.
don't know. Is that something you try to do? Like you're walking around the farm, or is
Yeah, I
that?
tried to. There's like a little loop I do.
Tell me more
Just
about that.
just goes around a few cornfields basically. It's about a mile long. There's a river on part of it, but I've done it enough times that I almost stopped noticing all the scenery of it. I just sort of do the walk, zone out. Sometimes I do it with other people on the farm, and then I'm usually just like chatting with them instead of thinking about math. But I try to do this as much as I can. Just there's something about walks, like you said. I think there's, for me at least, there's also something about being around trees, like just a little bit away from city noise.
Is it more about trees or nature in general?
Nature in general, I
Okay.
mean, yeah, nothing special about trees.
Is that what motivates you to like live on a farm per se, or?
Yeah, the opportunity just kind of happened. It's like my partner's family farm, and so moved in with her, and that's how this all came to be. But it was one of those things where like I could have stayed living more in downtown Ann Arbor or close to campus or something like that, but it's just like how often do you get a chance to go live on a farm? Like, when is this opportunity gonna fall in my lap again? Yeah, it's been cool. There's a bunch of things have happened that I just like experiences that I never would have had otherwise. There was I guess there was a cow slaughter in April roughly. There was a couple of cows that lived on the farm, and it was time to foodify one of them. And I was ready. I was gonna be as helpful as I could to this process and sort of be around it and just learn what it was like. I wasn't the one doing the slaughtering in particular or anything, but I was just gonna be around to help. And so I was there, and they were like, "Okay." I was like, "What can I do to help?" And they're like, "Okay, here's what you can do to help. Our 3-year-old is asking a lot of questions about what's going on right now, so you can like explain this to him."
Explain it. Okay.
And so I was like, "I have no idea like what you even this is my partner did a lot of it as well, but like we tried to just like, okay, this animal is becoming food. You have to cut the skin off of it, and then
3 year olds watching the whole time.
eat from a distance. Yeah, I don't think he wasn't like getting up in there, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was like strange and confusing for him as you'd expect.
Yeah.
But we're trying to not like hide it from him, like
Yeah.
let him know what's going
It's
on.
natural. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. It's quite the experience. Was that difficult for you in any way, just like being a part of that process, or even besides the 3 year old, or no?
A little bit. I mean, I have not been around a dead cow before, or like participated in anything like that. So it was new to me, and I kind of had to like get used to it or make myself do it. But I was that worked. Like I was the amount that I value just like having an experience that I would never have under any other circumstances.
Definitely.
That that's one of my core values, I think, and so that overcame whatever like aversion to dead cows I had.
Amazing. Yeah. It's an interesting value. So always try to have as many experiences as possible. So not conforming to fear and just kind of getting out there and having that experience.
Yeah, or
How
just yeah. It's I don't want to say that there's like never fear involved in these things.
There's
It's
always
just like
fear.
having
Yeah.
something else that you prioritize over it.
So you kind of like feel through the fear, and then despite the fear, you still do it.
Yeah, it's more like that. Um, yeah, one of these students who I was talking about earlier, who like I did research with, and he's working industry now. He had this mantra that he would say whenever we were doing research that it's good to always be a beginner at something. I like that a lot. So I was like sort of tried to carry that with me.
How has that manifested in your life?
It's so it's like the way that it like affects what I do is I just try to sort of pick something up that I'm bad at and do that regularly. I took salsa lessons a couple of years ago
Like
for
dancing.
a while. Yeah, like I'm terrible at it, but it was something to do, just like something to be bad at. Picked up a clarinet recently. That's my most recent one. Um, yeah, the point of all of this is not salsa or clarinet. For me, it's just, I guess it's a way to stay grounded. Just, if you do the thing that you're good at all the time, it's really easy to feel like it's the entire world, when in fact crafts and shortest paths. Most people live long and healthy lives without ever thinking about them.
Yeah, you can really get wrapped up to whatever you do, and I think that it's useful to have something that takes you out of it.
Yeah.
And I think the world is so beautiful that there's like millions of things you could do.
Yeah, I love that.
Like from salsa to clarinet, I mean, yeah, stepping outside your comfort zone is great, and I always think like maybe I should do that more. Like there's always like new things you could try, and yeah, it's inspiring. I've always wanted to play an instrument, but I never like gotten myself to go to a practice. So how's clarinet?
It's extremely hard. I have no idea what all the valves do. It's the extent of it is it's like a crappy plastic clarinet with a built-in reed, and I've just sort of been, you blow in it and then you try out a few different fingerings, and I don't know, maybe if I do this enough, I'll start to like remember what the different fingerings do, but we'll see.
Do you feel like it's helped you to think in different ways? Because I feel like a lot of your work might be very linearly focused on a certain kind of thinking. So
yeah, like it's just a completely different muscle than any of the math stuff that I've done. In terms of thinking of different ways, I notice myself getting frustrated with it is more what it is. Like with math, I'm confident enough now that like I don't feel frustrated that often. Like I can kind of be like, yeah, it's fine, I'll solve this problem eventually. But with this, like I notice myself missing a note or messing up and being like, I'm done, I'm just gonna go do something else. And I kind of have to like push that down a little bit.
I see. So you feel that less in math?
Yeah, used to feel that all the time in math, but the like I'm done with this frustration gets better with time. I'm sure that's true of any skill.
What do you do when you hit roadblocks in problem solving, especially with these bigger problems that are not just like the seventh problem on your problem set?
Right. Yeah, roadblocks in problem solving. One of the key skills is just to like have a few problems active and just be like, well, I'm stuck on that one. I'm just gonna put that aside, and then like maybe something will come to me later and hope for the best. That's one of them. Talking to someone, often my students, about this, I've found really helpful. They even just like the process of explaining it to another person who cares about it and wants it to be good. That'll get you somewhere.
Amazing. What's like the longest roadblock you can remember with some of your...
Oh man, I'm still on some of these longest roadblocks. Yeah, there's in terms of problems I've worked on seriously, there's one that's about 8 or 9 years going now. It's called the girth conjecture. It's some statement about graphs, and just every now and then I pick it up and think about it, and it gets stuck every time, but I still like it. It just, right now, it feels like doing that feels less like I'm excited that I might solve the problem, because that feels unlikely, and more just like it's like visiting a place that you used to go all the time. It's nostalgic.
It's a cool way to put it. Yeah, I think this idea of roadblocks is interesting to me, because I've been trying as much as possible to work through these problems as much on my own as I can. Because I think there's definitely a sense of satisfaction in like making those dots align, especially when you do it yourself.
Yeah. With
minimal hints or outside help. And I think it's obviously harder when you have a time constraint, which is just the nature of how courses work, and there's not much we could do to either expand that, or sometimes you just need like a lot of time to think about one problem and then it clicks, and it's pretty satisfying. But yeah, I mean, typically my process is like try to wrestle with it for as long as I can before like I'll ask a friend, or I'll try to Google some concepts and try to see like how can I keep working through this and figure it out. But yeah, I definitely do hit those roadblocks sometime, and I'm just like reading this over and over again, and it's like I don't know where to go. And sometimes I'll jump to the next question, sometimes I'll ask a friend, but it's like they're definitely, with these kind of problems, they're definitely more frequent. So that's what I was really curious about, like at the macro level of the type of research you do, like how is it, what are like strategies you found to deal with those kind of...
Have you like worked with friends on these, like tried to like talk bounce ideas back
Yeah.
and forth until you arrive at some kind of solution. Is
Yeah.
that worked? Have you
Definitely.
like hit these moments?
I've definitely found some friends who like kind of share their approach to this. Like I think in high school, my approach was always efficiency, like get it done as quickly as possible. And now it's like I'm okay to spend like an extra hour or two on it just to think through it.
Nice.
And like sometimes my friend sees something I don't see, and I see something he doesn't see, and that's been really useful.
That's awesome.
And
Oh, I
especially
love that
with,
feeling when you like each have half the
it
puzzle.
kind of combines in that way. And yeah, I think that's really useful because I think when you said about explaining it to someone else, I've seen that help me a lot too. Because like sometimes I'll get the answer, then I'll explain to someone, oh, and I just see like, oh wait, that's wrong, never mind. And it's I'll have like pages of scrap work and be trying to figure something out. So I think definitely it's useful to like kind of bounce ideas off friends, not just like ask my friend for an answer, more just like let's talk about this and try to figure it out.
Yeah, I love that. If you ever if you had a moment with friends in these problems where like you like come up with some word that's describing a situation, or like, you know, you're like, this node in the graph is a green potato, and then you start like, you know, like you develop language, or like somehow having a conversation, or if somebody wandered in, they would just be like, I have no idea what's being said here.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, you also mentioned earlier today that sometimes you'll take like an abstract problem and then kind of turn it into something with more of a story behind it, like the stick figures in the hiking story you mentioned. So, I mean, is that an approach you typically use? Because I think sometimes just abstract and theoretical can get too much. So, do you typically try to build a story around it in a way, or see it in a different way?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like there's all these problems have all these like P's and Q's and quantifiers, and there's just like at some point you can understand every individual symbol, but you just kind of lose the meaning, and it feels like you don't understand what's happening and you're just pushing stuff around. I don't know if you've had that experience. I have that experience all the time with this stuff. Like it just somehow becomes one more symbol than I can keep in my brain at the same time. And yeah, the solution to that, I think, is have a story. Just like make sure that you're keeping track of what you're actually saying here as you're doing something.
Yeah, very useful. Amazing. Well, about an hour and a half in.
Okay.
Greg Bodwin, it's been incredible discussion. We touched on a lot of topics.
We did.
A lot of graph theory. I don't know. I had an hour and a half graph theory in me, but hopefully, I asked decent questions. Hopefully,
absolutely.
to explore. But it was a lot. I learned a lot from this, and it was really, really cool to see your perspective on the things. To see that I love how much you do care about what you do, and that whenever I meet someone who just cares about what they do, like it makes me happy because. Anyone, like it can be any domain of life. Like when I'm talking to someone, I know that they care about what they do. That makes me happy. So I'm glad that you're one of the people out there who contributing to a wealth of knowledge while doing it as something you love. So
absolutely, I do love it. And thanks a lot for having me. I also like this project that you're doing of just like finding little things that people care about, whatever they may be. I'm sure that your next one is not going to be about graph theory. I have no idea what it will be, but like if you pick someone else from the population, there's going to be something that they care about the same amount that I care about this, but it'll be something else. And yeah, I love that. So it's beautiful about the world.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and maybe again a year from now we can see where we can connect again and do another one.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. Well, have a good one. Thank you for tuning in to my episode. If you enjoyed that episode, I guarantee that you'll love this episode right here. The best way to support the channel is by hitting the subscribe button. It'll help me to upgrade the channel, get better guests, better production, and overall more episodes for you. And by hitting the subscribe button, it will ensure that you'll never miss a new release. While you're at it, hit the like button, leave a comment, and share the link with your best friend. Thank you once again for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.